Welcome to the Becoming SuperHuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we dive into today's episode, I want to let you guys know about an opportunity to learn some of the most important skills in life, if not the most important skills. And those are the skills of learning and doing so rapidly, effectively, and easily. You see, guys, I'm putting on a completely free 60-minute webinar that you guys can check out, where I will be going into my absolute best memory tips, learning tips, and speed reading tips so that you can immediately begin applying them and accelerating your learning of anything and everything. All you need to do to claim your spot in this free webinar is visit jle.vi/webinar. We have showings at many different times throughout the days for every time zone, but you have to log in and claim your spot. So that's jle.vi/webinar. And I really look forward to seeing what you guys achieve. This episode is brought to you by Organifi. You guys, one of the only things that every nutritional expert that we've had on the show seems to actually agree on is that we all need to eat more vegetables, eat more greens, eat organic, cut out all the processed junk. Well, who has the time, right? Who has the time to go out, do the shopping, make the salads, make the juices, make the smoothies? And that's what I love so much about Organifi. Their product is an all-organic green juice. It has all of the nutrients that you need. It tastes absolutely amazing, and it's made by wonderful people who I consider to be personal friends. And as listeners of this show, you guys can actually save 20% on your first order. And all you have to do is go to Organifi.com. That's ORGANIFI.com and use the coupon code SuperHuman at checkout. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to the Becoming SuperHuman podcast. You guys, today we are going to take a little bit of a different topic, a little bit of a different side of Becoming SuperHuman, and talk about probably the least discussed topic on the show, which is financially becoming superhuman. We're joined today by a friend of mine from the Genius Network. His name is Buck Joffrey, and he runs Wealth Formula, which is about helping overworked but well-paid individuals look for a better life. They define wealth as the freedom to do what you want with your life, which is exactly how I define it. And they help people reimagine what wealth accumulation can mean, and most importantly, relearn some of those core fundamentals that we've all been taught, like invest in the stock market and trust your wealth advisor. I decided to have Buck on the show because I took his course and I was wowed by it. A lot of the things I knew from business school and from interacting with millionaires and business luminaries, but a lot of the things I didn't know and really needed to hear. So I think it's a welcome dose of, hey, wake up. You have all these opportunities, and I think you guys will really, really enjoy it. So without any further ado, let me present to you my super friend, Mr. Buck Joffrey. Mr. Buck Joffrey, welcome to the show, my friend. It's so good to finally reconnect.
Yeah, good to talk to you again.
Yeah, I had an absolute blast on your show just talking about learning and memory and branding and all that stuff. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
My audience was really excited about that conversation. It was a little bit different from a lot of the podcasts that we have, but I think that change up was really nice for them.
Yeah, and that's really a beautiful segue into what I think is going to be a little bit of a welcome change up for our audience, which is we haven't really talked about the financial side of being superhuman or achieving what many people think to be the impossible. So I'll start with a really kind of broad question and we'll dive right in. And that question is, well, first, I guess, why don't we do this? Tell me a little bit about how you go from being a brain surgeon, as I mentioned in the intro, to becoming an expert on wealth and teaching people about wealth. What led to a shift in your life?
Well, the brain surgery, that's where I started out in medicine and left that and ultimately ended up in plastics, mostly just because I wanted a better lifestyle, or a lifestyle, shall we say. And when I got out of training, I was very academic throughout residency. I was publishing a lot and writing a lot, and kind of got burned out. Just kind of realized that all this stuff that I thought was a different kind of wealth, right? Which is people saying you're great and people saying you're smart and looking up to you and thinking, wow, I'm a surgeon and I'm an academic and all this stuff. I wasn't really into it anymore. And so I finished my training. The day after my graduation, I get married. A week later, we were coming back from our honeymoon from Puerto Vallarta. I never really thought about money in general, Jonathan. I mean, this is the thing is like, I never really thought about money or getting rich or anything like that. But on the way back from Puerto Vallarta, I picked up this book in this, dingy airport bookstore. It was called the Cashflow Quadrant. And I had no idea who Robert Kiyosaki was. This guy with like long hair, it was like some romance novel. There wasn't a lot of choices. So I just picked up Cashflow Quadrant and read it on the plane. For me, it was transformational. And the reason it was transformational is because I was a good student. I did everything the way you're supposed to, right? And what do good students do? They absorb what people tell them. They don't really necessarily think. And all of a sudden, there was this different perspective on not only finance, but in life in general. This idea that there's something called entrepreneurship and there's something called being a business owner. All these things never even crept into my mind for some reason. I don't know why, but they didn't. So it changed my paradigm for good. And so when I started my practice ultimately in plastics, I started as an entrepreneur and from day one said, okay, I'm going to turn this thing into a business. I'll be owner operator to start, and then I'm going to phase myself out, get some doctors and phase it out and be a business guy. And so that's what I did. And then I got the bug and I did it a couple more times with a few other businesses. And then I started making money. Mm-hmm. All right. And then the question is, what do you do with it? How do you invest it? So again, you don't really learn about this in school so much. When people say, well, maybe if you got a business degree or accounting degree, that's not true either. You don't really learn personal finance in those situations. Where you learn it is through conventional wisdom, which takes over for the academic curriculum that we have. And conventional wisdom tells you to just find somebody who's smart, a wealth advisor, and give them all your money. The problem is that the conventional wisdom in this situation was actually designed by Wall Street. And Wall Street, it's sort of like the proverbial, the fox guarding the hen house, right? And so what I realized was, hey, there's got to be a better way because, the richest families in the world are not investing in mutual funds. So what are they doing? So that was a quest for me to ultimately learn the nuances of investing like the ultra affluent, even though I wasn't ultra affluent, I was making good money.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. So I have to reveal to our audience that I've been taking your course and it's really refocused me on some things that I think I knew and also some things that I definitely didn't know. So Buck, I want to ask you, and this is that really broad question that I threatened with earlier. What's wrong with the way that most people do it, right? Because so many people are, like you said, the good student, right? And they study hard and they go get this great high-paying job. They become a doctor, a lawyer, whatever, and then they get stuck, right? And they go with a conventional wisdom. What's wrong with that conventional model?
Well, there's lots of things wrong with it. First of all, let's look at it from a couple different perspectives. What is that conventional wisdom? The conventional wisdom is that you start making this money and then you hand it over to a wealth advisor. The wealth advisor knows more than you. And therefore, it's kind of like going to a doctor, right? A doctor knows more than you. And so that's why you're giving your money to a wealth advisor. That's why you're not treating yourself. And that's a little bit of a fallacy, right? Because a lot of these wealth advisors are they've done like a 3-month type certification program or something like that. And a lot of them may not have as much money as you. So taking advice from somebody who doesn't have as much money as you is not a good thing to do either. But the bottom line is the paradigm itself is very much this idea that there are these things, right? These are, stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. And there are these different buckets. You always hear the wealth advisors talking about buckets. You have your growth bucket, you have your, conservative bucket, et cetera. And so the first problem is what the heck are those buckets anyway, right? I mean, like this one magically grows at 10%. I mean, okay, sure. What's in that bucket? I don't really understand it. And does it really work? So starting to look at these things and sort of deconstructing them and say, wait, is this reality or is this something that has just been created artificially out of somebody with benefits? Fundamentally, the biggest problem with that model in my mind is that it relies very much on chance. It relies on you not thinking very much. And also, it is completely based on the idea of investing for what is called capital gains, right?
Right.
So capital gains, of course, that's how we invest when we invest in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. What we're not bonds, but certainly in stocks and mutual funds. What we're saying is that we're going to invest in these companies, and over time, these companies will be worth more than when we bought the stock, right? And therefore, we're just kind of basically riding that wave up. The problem is that it's very speculative. In reality, it's completely speculative because the valuation of companies, if you look at, stocks in general, when they're publicly traded, the valuations can go plus or minus like 20x at any given time, right? Whereas if you have a business, you have multiple businesses, I have multiple businesses, okay? And here's the thing. If you want to sell your business, you probably have a pretty good idea, like, okay, maybe I can get like 3 times earnings on this business or 4 times earnings or something like that. And I know that too. And that's not a very dynamic thing. When you're buying something on the publicly traded markets, now you're buying something at maybe it's 20x, 30x, 100x, but that's just for one day. And every day it seems to change very quickly. And that's what we're investing in when we're investing in the stock market. Now, think about it from the perspective of the reality. What's the reality about owning a business? The reality of owning a business for you is that you don't really necessarily care how much it's worth if you're not planning to sell it. What you really care about is that you're making money, right?
Absolutely.
So that's a difference between the paradigm of what I'm trying to urge is really ultimately thinking like a more of a business person and less somebody who's just buying and selling businesses for no reason at all. So that's probably the biggest thing. It's a big shift in thinking, right? Trying not to be a speculator and letting others speculate with your money, and then actually turning around, pivoting, and turning it into something that you say, hey, I'm actually smart enough to manage my own money. This is not something that is so nebulous and complex that it's way beyond me. It always cracks me up because you have some of these incredibly creative entrepreneurs out there who are making tons of money in very creative ways. And then they make all this money and then they turn around and they invest like their grandma, right? Why are you doing that? Why don't you hack that too?
Absolutely. So much of this resonated in your course, Buck, for a couple of different reasons. One is a couple of different times throughout my MBA, and yes, I'm one of those, I found myself in a classroom with someone who wrote the book on stock buybacks or the book on valuing a company. And I had multiple professors just say to us, level with us and be like, look, you have to understand that it's all bullshit, right? At the end of the day, like this is all a game. One professor told us about how it's all just these supercomputers trading against each other. And if you take out the supercomputers that are responding to other supercomputers, you basically have no trading left. And another one telling us like it's legalized gambling. You have to understand like how a company is actually doing fundamentally is maybe 10 to 20% of the stock's actual performance. And it's all about public perception, which is basically the same as betting on winning horses. Which horse sounds and looks the healthiest. And so it really clicked with me when I took your course. I was like, holy shit, And the second thing that really, really resonated with me that you said was, how many people do you know who have actually become millionaires passively investing in the stock market? And I thought to myself, and I said, none. And then how many people do you know who have passively become millionaires by investing in the alternative that you propose, which is real estate? And I said, a hell of a lot. My parents became millionaires because their house appreciated. I became a millionaire because my first house appreciated. And that really resonated with me. So talk to me. I mean, again, I'm going to bite my tongue here because I'm a convert, but talk to me about the alternative, right?
The alternative is putting some thought into your investments. Ultimately, that's what it is. Again, the big point that I try to make is this, is that your audience, my audience, they're smart people. And so maybe if you try to learn about everything and then you turn around and maybe you decide that you do want to do what conventional wisdom, tells you to do. But my point is that if you look at, like you said, nobody that I know has ever gotten rich from investing passively by giving their money to a wealth advisor, right? No one's gotten rich. You might be rich and maybe then they just, kept your money and they didn't lose it all. But you don't have that, situation where somebody's actually gotten rich. How do you get rich? Well, that's where the secrets, not the secrets, but, the way that the ultra wealthy invest is different than the rest of us, because they think about it. They think about how to make money, and they're not programmed to think, yeah, if I get 6, 7, 8% on something, that sounds really good, right? Mm-hmm. They're not programmed that way. So real estate is a big part of it, but real estate is not the only thing. But real estate is a great place to start because a lot of people understand the concept of real estate and understand the idea that you're owning something that ultimately that may appreciate in value, but ultimately also puts in money in your pocket today.
Yes.
And that's the big difference. Investing in the stock market for capital gains is like, I think of it as like trying to accumulate a bunch of, you've got this water bottle and you're trying to fill it up as much as possible, throughout your life. And then one day you cap the water bottle because you're done working, you want to retire. And then you're walking around slowly sipping at that bottle, just hoping that you die before it runs out of water. That's effectively what the, investing for capital gains is. What we're saying is a big part of what we want to do in our lives is try to create something. You're not buying stocks, bonds, mutual funds. You're not buying real estate. You're buying income, right? You are buying income. That's the way I think it's important to think about things. You earn money actively, and then you try to buy streams of income other places. That may be through real estate. It may be through something else. Fundamentally, for me, that's a great place to start. Now, I'm not against capital gains. I'm not against speculation. But most people, for the majority of their money, need to get to the point where they change their paradigm from buying stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, even buying real estate, to, hey, I'm going to buy income somehow.
I love that. And this is such a major shift. It comes back to the whole cash flow quadrant idea, where Kiyosaki says, and I haven't read Cash Flow Quadrant, but Rich Dad, Poor Dad changed my life hands down. Talking about, how the rich buy assets that generate money and they use money to make more money, whereas the middle class and the poor just live off the money that they make. And this was one of the main ideas that helped me realize, I'll never work for money again. And that's why I'm in this business. I assume it's why you're in this business, where you and I create online courses or books or other kinds of assets, which, like real estate, we build income generating assets. I think that's such an important shift in your mental operating system when it comes to money. It's like you're no longer doing what 99% of the world does, which is work for money.
I think one of the mistakes, though, that people make after reading the Kiyosaki books initially is they become sort of, they're like, yeah, I'm going to buy a bunch of real estate and I'm going to get rich. And, I talk to people who listen to my show and they're all excited, and I'm glad they're excited. And they're telling me how they're going to start buying real estate and they're going to retire in 5 years. I'm like, well, that's great. So how much money you're making right now? Well, I'm kind of broke right now. Well, how are you going to buy the real estate?
Right.
So it's sort of most real estate shows and that sort of thing, they skip that step, which is, it's not realistic to try to create this sort of passive income stream, for yourself without making money in the first place. And that's for my show. I cater to high paid professionals, people who are already making money. And so my message to them isn't, hey, quit your job. My message to them is, well, you're in a good shape already. You've got that first issue solved. You're already making money. Now let's figure out how to get you, to turn that into more income. But one of the things to think about is, well, how do you get that money in the first place? And that's where I think entrepreneurship, if your job is not cutting it, if your job is not going to get you out of it, I think that's where you got to really start thinking about, other ways of making money.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do people structure this? And I'm asking also because I have a personal interest in this question, which is I'm balancing the idea of buying a larger home for myself and my future family. I'm sure many people in our demographic are thinking about buying their first home. Is it a better idea to buy some investment properties and start buying income first, or should you first establish yourself, take care of your needs? What's your thinking on that?
It depends where you're in life. I mean, there's the theoretical thing that I think that makes sense to potentially do if you can do it. And then there's the realities of life. Now, so ideally, what I think it makes a lot of sense to do is to expand your means first and then live within those means. That doesn't mean skipping lattes. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you start using that money early on to make more money and then continue to live within the money that you're making and then continue to expand your means, you can gradually, get to the same place. But in other words, like, okay, so if I'm making good money, I could go buy a $100,000 car, right? Mm-hmm. But what if I put that $100,000 into something that's going to crank out, an annualized 20% return or something like that, right? Well, now you're expanding your means to another, 20 grand a month instead of just throwing $100,000 on this car that's never going to be an asset. Well, maybe you could expand it a little bit more so that it covers the cost of a payment on a car. So you've slowly gotten to the same place, but now, you're not just throwing money away, you're expanding your means and then sort of, moving your life into that direction, right? So ideally, that's how you do it. But the reality is sometimes it's not that easy. Sometimes, in my case, I finished my surgical training at like 34 years old, and my wife and I had a kid at 35, and we're like sick of being poor, we need to buy a house. So sometimes, you have to adapt. But if you're young and you're starting to make money and you can do that, expanding your means first and then moving into it, I think is the ideal situation.
Right. Absolutely. And I love the approach of just like, hey, take a good hard look at your life and what your goals are and where you are and decide based on that. There's kind of no one size fits all approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think of houses necessarily as investments, like the house that you live in. I mean, if it appreciates big money, it's sort of, you got lucky. I mean, you might as well have gotten lucky in the stock market. I'm talking about cash flow. So, I mean, in an ideal situation, say you wanted your house was going to be $1 million house. And what's that mortgage? Maybe it's like, like $4,000 or something like that. I have no idea. Maybe it's $4,000 or something like that. Well, instead of going and just plopping down a chunk and taking that $4,000 a month, why don't you just take the money that you earn, try to generate $4,000 in passive income or buy that income somehow and then buy that house and then let your investments pay for your house. That sounds like a much more comfortable way of doing it, doesn't it? I mean, that's kind of the ideal approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like, you're, and I know this largely also because of taking your course, which I'm really enjoying. You're pretty strong on single family or residential real estate as an income generating asset. Tell me a little bit about that and why that's such a prominent part of the wealth formula strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so much into buying single family homes. So first of all, let's talk about residential real estate. The reason I like residential real estate in general is because, it goes sort of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing. What do people need in good times and bad times? They need food and water and they need a roof over their head. So that's why I like multifamily residential real estate investments, because people need a place to live. So that also dictates, by the way, the types of real estate that I invest in. I don't typically invest in A-class real estate, meaning the luxury real estate. I mean, there are some exceptions to that. I mean, I do have some resort property and stuff, but usually I'm looking at B and C class, which is usually the step down, and maybe you're out of college and you're you're a young professional and you can't quite afford being in the luxury stuff. So you go to a B class, or C class is more working class, right? So those are the things that when the economy goes bad, people in A class fall down to B or C. And so for me, a lot of this is very much sort of coming out of logic. Okay, what do people need? And typically in bad times, what types of property do continue to perform? Mm-hmm. Now, just to be clear, people say to me all the time, hey, Buck, let's get real here. Property values, real estate goes down with the stock market. These markets follow each other. And that is very true. There's no question about it. But cash flow is cash flow. Remember, we don't care if we've got a house or a multifamily property that's throwing off a certain amount of cash per month because people are paying you rent. Even if the value of that property goes down because the value is a little bit more subjective, the cash flow that you get from that property really shouldn't change unless people don't want to live there anymore or they can't live there anymore, right? Anyway, so that's why I like multifamily is it really requires you live there. Whereas, if you get into, and the reason I like multifamily as opposed to single family is it just becomes an issue of math and scalability. With single family, you either have 0% vacancy or 100% vacancy. There's no 90% vacancy or 90% occupancy, which is what I like in multifamily. With single family, in each house, you've got a roof and you've got all your furnaces, et cetera. Where in multifamily, again, you've got scale, right? And so that's why I like the concept of multifamily, because I generally like larger things. They tend to be more stable. So you may be asking, well, how do I participate in that if maybe I don't have, $1 million to put down on a property or something like that. And that's one of those things where people don't realize there's ways to participate passively in real estate deals in larger assets as well as limited partners. So
tell us a little bit more about that. I don't want to force you to give away all the secrets of your course because, as I said, it really is a great and in-depth course. But how can people get involved passively in real estate?
Yeah, so most of it's mostly relevant to what you call an accredited investor. An accredited investor is a person who has, unfortunately, there are these laws that prevent everybody from participating in these kinds of things. But an accredited investor has, an income of $200,000 per year, $300,000 if filing jointly, or a net worth of at least $1 million outside of personal residence. So that makes you accredited. You don't have to go through a course or get a license or something. It's like being pregnant or not pregnant, right? You're accredited. And if you are, you qualify for deals that are for accredited investors only. And so this might be, for example, I'll just give you an example of a property that we just syndicated. It's all private stuff. So this was this is like a $10 million property, and we raised like $3 or $4 million from investors. Investors got to be limited partners in this deal, and they invested maybe $50,000. Some even invested $25,000. Usually, it's going to be a minimum of $50,000 at a time, though. And they invested as limited partners into this apartment building. So they brought in the equity, and then there's debt from the bank. And then they get all the benefits of ownership, of fractional ownership, meaning cash flow that's offset from all of the tax benefits of real estate, which typically, if you're getting 10 or 12% on real estate with depreciation and mortgage interest, that means that money is, typically going to be tax free. So the limited partner gets to participate in that. And then when the property is ultimately sold, they get to participate in that. And guess what they have to do? Nothing, because they're limited partners. They have no liability, et cetera. So this is a model that a lot of, family offices use, ultra wealthy people who are just, interested in investing in real estate. They find, people who are really good at real estate, and they invest, 100, 200, maybe 50,000, depending on who they are and how much money they have, into deals that they don't have to do anything with, but they have all of the benefits, ultimately turnkey, just as easy investing as investing in the equity markets, except now you're investing in something that actually has a potential of getting you a 20 or 30% return instead of a 5 or 6% return. So
Right. So I think what a lot of people are asking the audience, Buck, is where do I get started? I mean, what is the first step for people? Again, widely depending on where they are in their life and what their financial situation is, but how can people start going down this path and start correcting what could be a financial mistake of trusting someone else with their money?
There's a couple of things. I mean, obviously, that's what my whole show is about. So if this resonates with you, my podcast, Wealth Formula Podcast, I have a book that is, you can download at wealthformula.com called 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth, which is just a real, 1,000-foot look at a different way of looking at money. You can also get that by you can text me at 44222 and put in Wealth Formula as one word. And if you do that, we'll send a copy to you. But that's a good place to start, because I think this is as you called it, it's a paradigm shift, right? I mean, it's in the course, as you recall. By the way, the course, if you want to check it out, and I don't want to be too salesy here, but you can go check out the page at wealthformularoadmap.com. But this is a process, right? And in the course, we start out, for that reason, we start out with deconstruction, right? Forget everything you learn. Forget everything that they tell you and start over from scratch. I'm not saying everything they tell you is wrong. I'm saying just, it's like your whole life hacking thing, right? I mean, everything that we do in life is based on some sort of conventional wisdom. Let's start with a clean slate and figure out why it is what we're doing. So that would be a good place to start. And you'll be exposed to the way I think. I'm not saying I'm right, but at least you'll have different perspectives. I think that's one of the most important things, is just getting people's different perspectives.
I would agree. And as I said, we try not to be too salesy on the show, but in this case, I actually really strongly recommend people check out, at the very least, the ebook. But as I said, I have been enrolled in the course. In fact, I was consuming it so fast that I got stuck against the drip schedule of the course. So I have to get back into it. But the reason I wanted to have Buck on the show is I really enjoyed the course. I found it to be a welcome change and a refreshing opinion that completely intuitively makes sense. And also, I've been talking to some other financial advisors through Genius Network who all say, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. That is the strategy. So that is an endorsement from me on the product. Buck, where else can people reach out and learn more and find out about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's basically, the Wealth Formula Podcast, which is really the base. That's really where, most of my content is. And there's a lot of interviews with people I think that I learned from. I mean, for example, Robert Kiyosaki was on a couple months ago. And that was a treat, because he was really the one who changed my paradigm. I mean, I think everybody should pick up a copy of Cashflow Quadrant. Let me plug Robert's book, right? I mean, Robert's Cashflow Quadrant, I think, fundamentally changed my life. I mean, that's a big deal. So let me plug his book and start with that. But Wealth Formula Podcast, wealthformula.com. Certainly, if you like what I'm talking about and you want to learn more, this is what I do now because I'm so passionate about it. I mean, I don't practice medicine anymore. I'm pretty much a professional investor. And then I get on the podcast and I rant and rave about how this type of investing and thinking is superior to everything else.
That's awesome. Buck, I want to thank you again for your time. I know you're a super busy guy, as we were talking about before we hit record. You've got a family and a schedule, so I really appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Pleasure. Take care, my friend. All right, super friends, that is all we have for you today, but I hope you guys really enjoyed the show and I hope you learned a ton of actionable information, tips, advice that will help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or drop us a quick little note on the Twitter machine at GoSuperHuman. Also, if you have any ideas for anyone out there who you would love to see on the show, we always love to hear your recommendations. You can submit on our website, or you can just drop us an email and let us know. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.